You are exhausted. Not tired, bone-deep exhausted. The kind a full night of sleep doesn't touch. You tried the iron, the B12, the sleep routine, the morning walks. Still, by noon, you feel like something is draining out of you that you cannot name. You went to your doctor. She ran the panel. Normal range. All of it. And then she said this is just aging, and you drove home more defeated than when you walked in. Estradiol drops 95% after menopause. 1 in 5 women leaves that appointment dismissed, no follow-up question asked. 80% of OBGYNs completed medical school with fewer than 4 hours of menopause training total. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching this from. I want to know how far this conversation is reaching. And I'll tell you honestly, what I'm about to explain is something the standard lab panel was never built to catch. Not because the answer doesn't exist, because nobody in the training systems that shaped most of your doctors ever put it on the checklist. There is a hormone, not estrogen, not thyroid, that drives cellular energy, mitochondrial function, and dopamine motivation in your body. Women produce it, lose it quietly, and leave dozens of appointments never knowing its name. By the end of this conversation, the fatigue you have been told is just aging will look very different to you. You are exhausted. Not tired, bone-deep exhausted. The kind a full night of sleep doesn't touch. You tried the iron, the B12, the sleep routine, the morning walks. Still, by noon, you feel like something is draining out of you that you cannot name. You went to your doctor. She ran the panel. Estrogen. Checked. Thyroid. Checked. Everything normal. And then she said this is just aging, and you drove home more defeated than when you walked in. Estradiol drops 95% after menopause. 1 in 5 women leaves that appointment dismissed, no follow-up question asked. 80% of OBGYNs completed medical school with fewer than 4 hours of menopause training total. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching this from. I want to know how far this conversation is reaching. And I'll tell you honestly, what I'm about to show you is something the standard lab panel was never built to catch. Not because the answer doesn't exist, because nobody in the training systems that shaped most of your doctors ever thought to put it on the checklist. There is a hormone, not the ones she tested, that directly controls cellular energy, mitochondrial function, and the motivation signal in your brain. Women produce it, lose it quietly, and leave dozens of appointments never hearing its name. The silence around that hormone ends in this room. And by the end of this conversation, the exhaustion you were told is just aging will not look the same to you. Here is Act 2, Context and Background. Here is what I want you to understand about how we got here, because it didn't happen by accident. In 2002, and if you were in your 40s or 50s then, you remember this. The Women's Health Initiative study came out, and the entire country panicked about hormone therapy. Headlines everywhere. Estrogen causes cancer. Stop taking it. Doctors stopped prescribing it overnight. Patients stopped asking for it, and a generation of women, your generation, quietly absorbed the cultural message that hormones were dangerous and that the right thing to do was simply endure. What got lost in that panic was something that was already barely on the table, the conversation about testosterone, which, even before 2002, was almost never happening for women. The I didn't kill that conversation. It just made sure the room it might have started in was completely emptied out. And here is what your mother never told you, not because she was hiding it, but because she genuinely did not have the words. She was tired too. She gained weight she couldn't explain. She went flat in ways she didn't know how to describe to a doctor or a husband or even to herself. She called it the change, and she got through it the way women of her generation got through most things, quietly and alone. The silence you are living right now was handed down to you like a piece of furniture you didn't know was broken. Her silence became your silence. And what I'm telling you is that nobody in that chain, not your mother, not her mother, ever sat in a room where someone explained what was actually happening in her cells. That conversation was simply never available to them. The question I want you to sit with, and I will come back to this, is whether the system has actually changed enough to offer it to you now. The honest answer, as far as medical training is concerned, is mostly no. The average U.S. medical school curriculum allocates fewer than 1 hour to all of menopause, total, across 4 years of training. Female androgen decline specifically? Close to nothing. And the FDA has never approved a single testosterone formulation for women. That is not a footnote. That is the structural reason why a physician who wants to test and treat your testosterone faces immediate obstacles: no on-label pathway, unclear liability, and no standardized protocol to reach for. So most of them don't reach. They order the panel they were trained to order. It comes back normal. They tell you what the panel tells them to tell you. None of that is malice. It is architecture. A system built without the right room will never find what it wasn't designed to house. But here's what I haven't told you yet. There is a specific window, a biological clock running inside your body right now, and what happens inside that window determines what is still possible 5, 10, 20 years from now. That part comes next. 3 paragraphs, each averaging within the 80 to 110 word range, with one open narrative loop at the close. No data repeated from Act 1. Ready for Act 3 whenever you are. Look, the wellness supplement industry did not create this silence. It just found the opening medicine left. Over $4 billion a year in products marketed to women for unexplained fatigue, brain fog, energy that will not come back, products that treat the symptom and protect the omission, because if the clinical conversation ever happened, the supplements would not sell. After 2002, the hormone therapy world collapsed inward around estrogen fear, and whatever small space had existed for discussing testosterone in women just closed. The training systems that produce physicians never rebuilt what that panic erased. Today, fewer than 1% of women over 50 in this country receive testosterone testing as part of standard menopausal care. Not because the test is unavailable, because no protocol ever required it. And here is who absorbed that cost. Not one generation, several. Women in their 50s, their 60s, going back decade after decade, exhausted in ways they cannot explain, told they are aging normally, offered sleep advice and quiet reassurance. None of them warned that a primary cellular energy hormone had been quietly declining for years, and that without any intervention, the consequences follow a pattern that is predictable, measurable, and, I will say this plainly, preventable. But only if someone identifies the mechanism early enough. What that mechanism actually does inside your body, to your muscle tissue, your brain chemistry, your metabolic rate, that is exactly where we go next. Look, I want to be precise. Testosterone in women is not a libido hormone. It is a metabolic regulator. Its central job is to activate the mitochondria in your muscle cells, the machinery that converts food into usable energy. When testosterone drops, that activation drops with it. You eat well. You move. Your cells run below capacity regardless. That is not willpower failure. That is cellular biochemistry below its functional threshold. And that is only the hormonal surface. The neurological layer is the one that explains the flatness, the inability to start, the quiet behind your eyes that no iron supplement was ever going to touch. The second layer is neurological. Testosterone is the primary precursor to dopamine synthesis in the prefrontal cortex, the brain system driving motivation and initiation. When it drops, that signal goes quiet. The inability to start. A flatness with no name, not depression, neurochemistry below threshold. I went through this myself at 53. Standing at my kitchen sink before sunrise, hands flat on the counter, unable to begin the day. I was a physician. I did not recognize it because I had never been trained to look there. These two layers do not stay separate. They compound. And the metabolic layer, what it adds to both, is where the long-term cost of staying untreated becomes impossible to dismiss. The third layer is systemic. As testosterone and estrogen fall, cortisol rises, not from stress, but from HPA axis dysregulation as its hormonal regulators disappear. Elevated cortisol drives visceral fat storage regardless of what you eat or how much you move. In 30 years of practice, I have seen this exact pattern thousands of times. Doing everything correctly. Gaining weight no one can explain. Told it is your choices. Told it is your age. It is neither. It is a predictable hormonal cascade, and what that cascade does to your bones, your heart, and your brain over the next decade is exactly where we go next. Because those consequences are not gradual. They compound. Let me explain what is actually happening in your body, because there is a detail in how testosterone is measured that most physicians never clarify, and it changes the entire picture. When a doctor orders a testosterone level, most labs report total testosterone. But the hormone that actually reaches your cells is free testosterone, the fraction not bound to a carrier protein called SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. After menopause, SHBG rises. It binds more of what little testosterone remains, making it biologically unavailable. A woman can test within normal range on total testosterone and still have functionally negligible free testosterone. The number looks fine. Her cells are working with almost nothing. And what that cellular depletion does to metabolism, this is where the eat less, move more advice begins to collapse under its own logic. Testosterone directly regulates insulin sensitivity in skeletal muscle. When it falls, muscle cells become less responsive to insulin signals, and glucose that should fuel energy production gets redirected into fat storage instead. In the post-menopausal window, insulin resistance can accelerate by 20 to 30% compared to pre-menopausal baselines, independent of dietary choices. Your weight is not a reflection of your discipline. It is a reflection of a metabolic system operating without the hormonal signal that regulated it for 30 years. And there is still a layer beneath that one. I had a patient, I will call her Margaret, who came in 2 years ago and said exactly this. I feel like I am living inside someone else's body. Everything I used to do just stopped working. She had gained 22 pounds in 18 months. 3 full panels across 3 different physicians, every value within range. I ordered free testosterone alongside SHBG. Her free testosterone sat at the very floor of measurable range. SHBG elevated, binding what little remained. When I explained the mechanism, her face changed. Not relief, quiet anger. 18 months of self-blame. One lab nobody had ordered. She understood in that moment that her body had not betrayed her. The system had simply never looked. Here is what most women are never told about bone. Estrogen protects bone density. That much has slowly entered the public conversation. What has not is that testosterone builds the structural protein matrix that estrogen then maintains. Both hormones are active in bone. Both need to be present. In the first 5 to 7 years after menopause, a woman can lose up to 20% of bone density, one of the steepest physiological declines across any comparable period. Because testosterone was never tested, that structural loss begins invisibly while she is still being told her labs are fine. The skeleton does not wait for the conversation to catch up. In 2019, the British Menopause Society published a position statement reviewing evidence from randomized controlled trials on testosterone therapy in postmenopausal women. The conclusion was consistent: measurable improvements in energy, cognitive function, and mood with a favorable safety profile. That evidence has been available for 6 years. Yet fewer than 15% of women with significant menopausal fatigue are ever evaluated for testosterone deficiency as a contributing cause. The data exists. The clinical practice has not caught up. And that gap between what is known and what gets tested is where your years are quietly going. Here is what I want you to sit with. You did not fail the protocol. The protocol failed to include you. You exercised because the guidelines said to. You adjusted your diet, tracked your sleep, cut the caffeine, added the supplements, and the weight kept coming. The energy kept not returning. The flatness stayed. That is the hormonal cascade in action. A system running without its key component will not respond to effort directed at everything except the missing piece. That is not aging. That is a hormone shift nobody explained to you. You are not crazy. You are not alone. Research consistently shows that women with significant menopausal symptoms spend years attributing clinical failures to personal ones before any hormonal investigation is suggested. Your body was not betraying you. A system built without the right tools was simply unable to find what it was never trained to look for. The silence was institutional. The weight of it was yours to carry alone. In the first 3 years after menopause, if nothing changes, the fatigue doesn't level off. It becomes the floor. Sleep fragmentation compounds the damage. Every disrupted night pushes cortisol higher the following morning, deepening the hormonal dysregulation already driving this. The fog thickens. You start canceling things you used to look forward to, not because you stopped caring, but because you are rationing what remains. 70% of women in the menopausal transition report significant anxiety as a primary symptom. The diagnosis, almost always, burnout, life stress, never the missing hormone. Between years 3 and 10, the body shows what the lab panel was never measuring. Muscle mass continues its quiet decline. Resting metabolism follows, not because she stopped moving, but because muscle is the primary engine of caloric expenditure. and it is losing the anabolic signal that maintained it for 3 decades. Genitourinary syndrome, affecting more than half of postmenopausal women, becomes chronic and progressive in this window. Unlike hot flashes, it does not self-resolve. Cardiovascular risk rises as the vasodilatory and anti-inflammatory effects of both estrogen and testosterone disappear, year by year, without a single symptom she can point to. And then cognition starts registering differently, the one that frightens women most and the one almost nobody connects to hormones. Not memory loss, not yet. Processing speed. Word retrieval. The pause before the name that should come instantly. She notices it. Her family notices it. Testosterone receptors are dense in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, the exact structures governing memory and executive function, so the declining signal there has measurable consequences. Depression rates in the perimenopausal and early postmenopausal window are double those of premenopausal women the same age. That is not circumstance. That is brain chemistry below its functional threshold. 30 years out, and I want you to hear this as clinical fact, not threat, the silence becomes structural. Sarcopenia affects nearly 1 in 3 women over 70, and it is a primary driver of falls, fractures, and loss of independence. 1 in 2 women over 50 will experience an osteoporotic fracture in her lifetime. Cardiovascular disease remains the leading cause of death in women over 65, surpassing all cancers combined. The neuroprotective role of testosterone in the aging brain has been documented in peer-reviewed literature for over a decade. It has not made it into the standard protocol. Not yet. But the cost I want you to sit with, the one happening today, not in 10 years, is inside. The self-blame. Women with chronic, unexplained symptoms who are dismissed or undertreated consistently internalize clinical failure as personal failure. She concludes she is not disciplined enough, not resilient enough. She watches the women around her appear to manage and decides the problem is uniquely hers. It is not. It never was. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these consequences is the one nobody warned you about. I read every one. This is not personal failure. This is inherited silence with a measurable physical cost. So here is what you do. You walk into your next appointment with specific language, not a complaint, a clinical request. You say, I'd like a full hormone panel that includes total testosterone, free testosterone, SHBG, estradiol, progesterone, and FSH if my perimenopause stage is still unclear. Ask for a DEXA scan by name if you haven't had one since turning 50. Ask for fasting insulin if weight has been unexplained. And if she hesitates, you say this exactly. I understand my previous results may appear within standard range. I'm experiencing persistent fatigue, word retrieval difficulty, and weight changes I cannot account for through diet or exercise, and I'd like these investigated as potential hormonal causes, not attributed to stress or aging. If you are still dismissed, Doctor, have you completed any continuing education in menopause management in the last 5 years? Not to challenge her, because the answer tells you immediately whether she has the tools to help you. This is hard. You are asking a system that quietly failed you for years to suddenly become the system you needed. Not every appointment will go the way it should, and that is not your fault either. If your current physician cannot meet you here, look for a provider certified by the Menopause Society, formerly NAMS, whose directory at menopause.org lists clinicians with documented training beyond the standard curriculum. That credential is the difference between a provider who reaches for the right panel and one who sends you home with the same reassurance that got you nowhere. You are not failing. You were never told the truth about what was happening to you. You are a woman who now walks into that room with clinical understanding in one hand and the exact words to demand a real answer in the other, and that changes what that appointment is allowed to be. The silence ends in this room. That is what this has always been, a clinical truth that should have reached you years ago. Here is the question I want you to carry. How many years did you spend interpreting a system's silence as your own failure? That number is different for every woman, and it is never the number she deserves. Leave a comment below and tell me what you needed to hear today that you have never heard before. I read every single one. There is a next layer, and it matters more than most women expect. Next, we talk about what actually happens in the appointment when a woman over 50 walks in and asks for this test. What a menopause-trained provider looks for in the numbers. What the result means when it finally comes back. You will want to be there for that. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one. Leave a comment below and tell me what you needed to hear today, or share your story, even just a piece of it, because I want to know how long you have been carrying this without a name for it. What you write matters, not just to me, but to the woman who scrolls down after you, still convinced the exhaustion is her fault, and finds your words first. You may not know her, but what you say next could be the first honest thing she's ever read about her own body, because there is still a layer we haven't reached. Next, we go into what actually happens when a woman over 50 walks into an appointment and asks for this test by name, what a menopause-trained provider looks for in the numbers, what it means when the result finally comes back, and why that appointment goes so differently depending on who is sitting across from you. That conversation is the one we have next. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one.